We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You're listening to Carousel Sniper Victim, a Dead Glass Design production, with your host, Sean Jeffrey.
All roads remain sealed off to the Port Arthur site tonight while police try to negotiate with the gunman. Around 2:30 this afternoon, the man began a shooting rampage, firing a hail of bullets throughout the historic site.
Good morning. On the island of Tasmania, the worst massacre in Australian history is finally over. At least 34 people were killed and 4 others critically wounded when a 29-year-old gunman with a history of mental problems opened fire in a popular tourist area.
Even before the tragic events of Sunday the 28th of April, 1996 unfolded, the historic site of Port Arthur, south of Hobart, had its own dark and twisted history. One of convicts, hard labour, prisons, as well as economic and social hardships. However, nowadays, the World Heritage listed site's natural and man-made beauty draw tourists from around the country and across the globe. On that fateful day in April 1996, local Mayor Martin Bryant chose his victims. Using a military-style firearm to shoot dead 35 people and severely injure 23 others in a massacre that would forever change Australian culture, especially in relation to gun ownership. On that day, Martin Bryant's youngest victim was 3, and his eldest over 70. The gun laws that came into effect in the immediate aftermath of the massacre at Port Arthur significantly reduced the number of guns in the country and the number of gun-related deaths. One of the world's worst massacres perpetrated by a single gunman mostly unfolded within the space of just 45 minutes. Bryant, who struggled with recorded mental health issues, loneliness, and had suffered traumatic losses in the weeks and months leading up to the incident, planned the attack carefully. Despite his limited IQ of 66, which put him in the lower 2% of the population, he still had the functional and reasonable physical capacity to carry out one of the most atrocious gun-related massacres in recorded history. Sunday, April 28, 1996, 6 a.m. Martin Bryant wakes early at his home in Hobart's northern suburbs. His girlfriend, having stayed over the night before, heads home when Bryant says he wants to be alone. She would later recall it strange that Martin had used his alarm clock, as he had no commitments and was living off the monies he had received from life insurances paid out to him. He starts packing things into a blue sports bag he'd bought a few days earlier from the local sporting department. He's not going out for Sunday morning training though. He's packing something completely different. A Colt AR-15 223 semi-automatic rifle, an SLR semi-automatic .308 caliber rifle, a semi-automatic 12-gauge Daewoo shotgun, copious amounts of ammunition, as well as a hunting knife. Along with a number of other items, he throws them into the boot of his yellow Volvo, which has a surfboard strapped to the top. It's now around 9:30 a.m. and he begins his drive out to the Port Arthur Peninsula. At around 11:15 a.m, Bryant arrives at the Seascape Cottage, his first stop. Bryant arrives at the bed and breakfast Seascape Cottage, which is owned by Sally and David Martin. Bryant is friendly with them, and the visit isn't completely unexpected. Bryant had done some odd jobs for the couple in the past. However, he also harboured feelings of resentment towards them. Martin Bryant's father had taken his own life at the family farm in the year preceding the massacre. Martin believed it was in part due to the fact that his father had been unable to get his finances in order quickly enough to purchase the Seascape bed and breakfast property, the property he was now at. Not much is known about what exactly happened during Martin Bryant's time at Seascape Cottage, but investigators speculate that during this time he kills both owners with the weapons he has brought with him. Around 20 minutes after arriving at the Seascape property, Bryant leaves and is seen by a couple, Maureen and John Mason, that are themselves pulling in to have a look at the bed and breakfast. Bryant approached the couple, who would later state that he seemed agitated, and after a brief exchange of words, in which Bryant told them that they couldn't have a look around because his girlfriend was inside, pregnant, they left, feeling rather unsettled by the encounter. Approximately 1 p.m. Bryant leaves Seascape Cottage and begins the drive to Port Arthur. Along the way, he makes a few brief stops, including to help two young women having car troubles. He suggests they should meet up later at the Broad Arrow Cafe for a coffee. Upon arrival at the historic site, Bryant is directed by information guide Ian Kingston to park his car away from the waterfront in the parking area. Bryant later moves his car back to near the waterfront before heading into the Broad Arrow Cafe and ordering himself a large tray of food for lunch. He takes it out onto the deck and begins eating. After finishing his lunch, he walks back into the cafe to return his tray. The following events take approximately 90 to 120 seconds to unfold. After returning his lunch tray, Bryant puts his sports bag onto an empty table in the corner and unzips it to remove the Colt AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. He then begins shooting. In the first 15 seconds, he would fire 17 shots. Malaysian tourists Mu Lee or William Ng and Su Leng Chun are killed first, followed quickly by 21-year-old Kate Scott. Scott's boyfriend, Mark Sargent, survives as a bullet grazes his scalp. Victorian visitors Anthony Nightingale, Wally Bennett, Ray Sharp, and Kevin Sharp, brothers, are killed next, while Gary Broom and John Fiddler escape with shrapnel wounds. Bryant turns his gun on Tony Kiston, who is killed as his wife Sarah Kiston escapes from the cafe. Andrew Mills, who had recently moved to Tasmania, is shot quickly after him. Thelma Walker, Pamelia Law, and Pat Barker sustain shrapnel wounds, but Graham Collier is seriously injured, shot through the jaw, as is another, Carolyn Lawton, shot in the back. Carolyn had thrown herself on her teenage daughter, Sarah, not having seen that Sarah had already been hit and killed. She would not learn this until later that day. Mervyn Howard from Victoria is killed after her, but his wife Mary survives with a gunshot wound. Robert Elliott is shot twice in the arm and in the head, but survives. Continuing in that 90 to 120 second period, Bryant moves into the connecting souvenir shop, where he immediately shoots and kills two local women, Nicole Burgess, 17, and Elizabeth Howard, 26, who were working behind the counter. Dennis Lever is killed as his wife, Coralie, and their friend, Vera J, managed to make it into a hiding space. Gwen Neander is also shot, trying to escape through a faulty exit door. Bryant makes a brief return to the cafe, where he kills winemaker Jason Winter, who had thought it safe to leave his hiding place. Bryant then returns to the shop to kill Ron Jarry, Pauline Masters, and Peter Nash, who were also trapped by the exit door. Peter Nash successfully shielded his wife, Carolyn. Approximately 1:35 p.m. Standing on the cafe steps, Bryant begins taking shots at the information centre and across the car park. Kitchen manager Bridget Cook had managed to escape the cafe and start warning tourists who thought the shots could be a reenactment. she was screaming to them that the gunman was real. She is part of a group running away from Bryant when he takes aim at them and starts shooting, hitting her in the leg. In another group, he hits bus driver Royce Thompson and Winifred Alpin from South Australia. Both are killed. Jeanette and Neville Quinn encounter Bryant, who proceeds to shoot Jeanette, though the bullet doesn't kill her, but another, aimed at a nearby Doug Hutchinson, does. Bryant returns to his car to change weapons, taking up the .308 caliber, another semi-automatic military-style gun. He sits briefly in his car, contemplating his next move. Once getting out, he passes wounded Jeanette Quinn and shoots her again, before climbing onto one of the buses. Finding it empty, he shoots through the windows at another bus parked nearby, where tourists had taken shelter. He kills South African Elva Gaylard and wounds Gordon Francis from Adelaide. Getting off the bus, he finds Jeanette Quinn's husband, Neville, assisting his dying wife. He chases Neville onto a bus where he shoots him. The bullet narrowly misses and instead grazes his neck. Bryant moves on, and once gone, Neville scrambles back to his wife, where she dies in his arms. Bryant gets back into his car and drives up to the toll booth at the site entry. People had begun to move towards the toll booth in an attempt to escape his onslaught. Among those, mother Nanette Mikak and her two daughters, Madeline 3 and Alana 6. Nanette and her two children had originally been with a group of tourists being led by information guide Ian Kingston, who had first seen Bryant upon him entering the car park and directing Bryant to where he could park his yellow Volvo. Kingston was directing visitors to safety when Nanette Mikak, leading her two daughters, decided to try to exit the site via the toll booth road, the same road Bryant had just driven back up towards the toll booth. They are the first he kills on the toll booth road. Nanette, the mother, with 3-year-old Madeline, and then 6-year-old Alana behind a tree, where she'd gone to hide. Bryant gets back in his car and continues up the toll booth road, where he encounters Robert Salzman and his wife Helene, and their friends, Mary Rose Nixon and Jim Pollard, all in a BMW. Bryant asks them to leave the car, but the men protest. He kills all 4 and then transfers all of his things into the BMW and drives up the main street of Port Arthur. At around 1:50 p.m, driving away from the toll booth road, Bryant comes onto the main street of Port Arthur. Almost immediately, he turns into a service station where he encounters Zoe Hall and her boyfriend, Glenn Piers, in their car. He attempts to pull Hall from the passenger seat, but Piers intervenes. Bryant forces Piers at gunpoint to walk to the BMW and makes him lie in the boot before returning to Hall. In those few seconds, Zoe Hall had managed to clamber over into the driver's seat of the car in an attempt to escape. However, before she could, Bryant walked back from the boot of the BMW and fatally shoots her. With Glenn Piers now trapped in the boot, Bryant drives the BMW back towards the Seascape bed and breakfast cottage. At around 1:55 p.m, at the entrance to Seascape, Bryant pulls over and begins shooting at passing cars on the highway. One shot hits Melbourne woman Linda White passing through her forearm. Shrapnel hits another driver, Doug Horn. A bullet goes through the hand of Canadian Susan Williams, and her husband is also wounded. Bryant returns to the cottage and drags hostage Glenn Piers from the car boot and handcuffs him inside the house. He douses the BMW in petrol and sets it alight. By 2 p.m, local constables Paul Hyland and Gary Whittle arrived at Seascape Cottage. They had no idea Bryant had access to his own high-powered firearms, but also the ones on the Seascape property. He starts firing at the policeman. By 2 p.m, medical assistance has arrived at the Port Arthur site. local ambulance volunteers, Colin and Robin Dell, and local GPs, Pam and Steve Ireland, are first on the scene. News reaches the Royal Hobart Hospital, and they begin to mobilise emergency services. A code brown is activated, an emergency call for large-scale trauma. The most severely wounded start to be airlifted out of Port Arthur. One of the uninjured bus drivers, Ian McCuley, takes a busload of the wounded and drives them 95 kilometres back to Hobart. At around 2:10 p.m, Bryant received a call from a woman working for the ABC network who had heard about the Port Arthur shootings and was trying to receive information about the event from local businesses. Calling himself Jamie, Bryant answered several questions before threatening to kill Piers should she call again. He then called the local police station, his call, coincidentally enough, being answered by the girlfriend of one of the police officers he had fired upon earlier. By 3:20 p.m, the first helicopters start arriving at Royal Hobart Hospital. Police operations have also begun to mobilise, a force that would involve half of the 1,000-strong Tasmanian police force and Victorian backup. With the help of psychologists, they start to form a picture of the shooter. At around 4:30 p.m. the same afternoon, police arrive at Seascape Cottage and surround it. Negotiator Sergeant Terry McCarthy speaks on the phone 4 times with Bryant, who continues to call himself Jamie and pretends that the Martins and Glenn Piers are still alive and that he's been preparing food and drinks for them. The Martins had been killed on Bryant's first visit, as we know, earlier that morning, and at some point during the standoff, he'd killed Piers too. At around 9 p.m, a special operations group of the Tasmanian police force arrives. Under the cover of darkness, they rescue the 2 policemen that had been taking sustained gunfire in the ditch since around arriving at 2 p.m. Over the course of the siege, Bryant would fire over 250 shots from the cottage. There was only a brief break between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. At around 7:45 a.m, now Monday the following morning, police spot smoke coming from the first floor of the cottage. Within 10 minutes, the fire catches hold. Bryant suddenly bursts from the cottage, clothes alight, and he drops to his knees. Police move in and extinguish his clothing and handcuff him. Bryant is taken to Royal Hobart Hospital for burns treatment in Special Operations Group custody. The doctors and nurses are given the option not to treat him, but none refuse to do so. There is public backlash, however, that the hospital is treating him at the same time as his victims. Even the bodies of those he has killed are still within the hospital, kept in the morgue after being forensically examined. While Martin Bryant recovered in Royal Hobart Hospital under heavy guard, the families and friends of the victims attempted to come to terms with the tragedy. After the police completed their reconstruction of the massacre, they estimated that, from the time Bryant had started shooting until the time he left the historic site, only 8 minutes had elapsed. During the reconstruction process by the police, they established that when Bryant killed the Martins, he'd stabbed David Martin and applied blunt force trauma to Nolene Martin before fatally shooting them both. When police later released the information that Bryant had purchased the quote military-style weapons used in the attack from a Hobart gun dealer without any form of licensing, it resulted in an uproar. Virtually overnight, large numbers of private citizens called newspapers, television stations, and talkback radio shows demanding that Australia's disparate gun laws be urgently reappraised. Within days, many politicians added their support and met to discuss a new set of national gun laws, including a total ban on all semi-automatic weapons. In response, representatives of several prominent pro-gun lobby groups protested against the sweeping changes, citing that the laws would only serve to place restrictions on decent, law-abiding citizens and not on the quote lunatic fringe that procured their firearms illegally. According to the Australian Institute of Criminology, fists, knives, and blunt instruments are the most frequently used weapons in homicides, with guns accounting for around 25%. Despite numerous protests, Prime Minister John Howard later implemented sweeping reforms regarding gun ownership in Australia, which included bans on the importation and sale of most, quote, military-style semi-automatic weapons. During subsequent interviews, Bryant described the details of the shooting from his own point of view to the police, but the details were altered, suggesting that he was either lying or mentally incapable of accurately recalling the events. During his trial, Bryant initially pleaded not guilty to all 35 murders charged against him, but then changed his plea to guilty without providing a confession. He was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to 35 consecutive life sentences, one for each murder victim, plus 1,035 additional years for attempted murder and inflicting grievous physical harm to numerous people. Because of other inmates stating possible plans to kill him during his incarceration, Bryant was put into a specially built cell in a near solitary confinement unit in the prison. During his incarceration and later institutionalisation, he attempted suicide a total of 8 times, the most recent attempt occurring on March 27, 2007, where he slashed his throat with a razor blade, forcing him to be briefly hospitalised before being returned to prison. A number of conspiracy theories have arisen after the massacre. Many have cited Australian politicians making predictions that only a massacre involving dozens of fatalities would spark a massive gun control legislation, for there were a number of deadly mass shootings prior to the Port Arthur Massacre. Several hospitals in Tasmania had put emergency plans into action days before the massacre, that helicopter pilots were readily available on the day of the massacre, that a 22-body morgue track was recently made available in Port Arthur, and that a number of news reporters were already present for a World Press Convention. They also claim in some of these conspiracy theories that Bryant's mentally impaired state would have rendered him unable to do the following: shoot 32 people in the Broad Arrow Cafe and in the gift shop with 29 gunshots and in under 90 seconds. Reload his rifle after firing 29 shots. The 30th bullet was left in the breech, allowing Bryant to shoot anyone if he was caught unaware. Also, firing from the hip, a difficult position that required firing with a right-handed posture, whilst Bryant was apparently left-handed. There were physical descriptions regarding the shooter that didn't match those of Bryant. And there was no coronial inquiry to give Bryant a trial, which is required if foreign nationals are killed or if there are deaths by fire, both of which requirements were met during the massacre.
On the island of Tasmania, the worst massacre in Australian history is finally over.
So that's the timeline and a bit of backstory to the Martin Bryant Port Arthur Massacre scenario. So we're going to go a bit deeper next episode with me and my mate Jack. We'll go over conspiracy theories and delve into all that crazy shit. But hope you enjoyed our first episode, or our first sort of timeline episode. And yeah, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.
Officer has engaged suspect vehicle in pursuit. Confirmed. Pursuit engaged.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Essential calls directed to clear and stand by to assist.
Carousel sniper victim.
All units be advised we have
A Dead Glass Design production.
Officer has engaged suspect vehicle in pursuit.